Hello and welcome back to Spider-Man in New York City. I was originally going to do this during the part of the game that was where New York was burning. Seemed like that would be a metaphor for something, but it just got too distracting to do it that way. So I'm doing it in the normal, looking over New York. It's just kind of a nice place, you know. Never really been to New York, I'll be honest. I've been through on a bus, and yeah, wasn't that fun to go through the bus depot in New York City. So my impressions of New York City immediately was not very good, but thanks to Spider-Man, I like it a lot more. Regardless, this video is not about my experiences in New York City, but more about politics, which is a topic I don't normally cover. You know, I like people to be able to come to, you know, listen to my videos about whatever and not feel like I'm criticizing their views or their beliefs. And politics is one of those surefire, somebody's going to be annoyed at you if enough people see it, somebody will be annoyed at you, basically, is how it goes with politics. Regardless, I think this particular point is important for me to cover it because, well, I don't think anyone's really looking at it in the way that I've seen this particular thing that's happened. I'm being very vague right now. It has to do with the Democratic debates, and it has to do with Bloomberg. Because I'm seeing from the media coverage, from kind of the response from people on all sides of the political spectrum, that they're treating Bloomberg with the same seriousness that they treated Trump before he was elected. And as it turns out, Trump got a ton of free publicity, and it ended up that pretty much the people who wouldn't support him politically gave him a lot of free publicity. So, you know, they made a mistake with Trump, and I think Bloomberg, they might be making the same mistake with Bloomberg. I think, you know, while the debates he did not come off as good as he could have in the debates, I think he came off a lot better than people realize he did. And I think a lot of the stuff that he said and did is going to connect with people. The sort of people who are kind of, you know, you don't hear very much from, but then when election day comes, there turns out to be an awful lot of them. The silent majority. That's the political terminology. And I think that's kind of happening with Bloomberg, as I said. And I'm going to go over. There are 4 points that I think connected more with the silent majority than people realize. So the first one, I'm going to start with this one because it's just plain interesting, because they made a campaign video for Bloomberg out of this. And it was the moment when he asked everybody if they'd run a successful business, and he's the only one on stage who'd run a successful business. Now, the campaign video, you can look it up, it's actually kind of a funny video, has him asking that question, and then it goes to like 20 seconds of silence from the other candidates, which didn't happen on stage. But it did. Yeah, oh, and there are crickets chirping in the background, too, as he asked this question. Now, none of that actually happened on stage, and the interesting point about this is that so many people have fact-checked that campaign, that ad, saying, like, no, this did not actually happen, and have spoken about how dangerous it is, how it's misinformative, and so on, which actually seems to be kind of insulting to the average American. It's basically saying, oh, the average American is too stupid to realize that there weren't actually crickets in the debates. So, and I think this is going back to what I said about Trump. Trump got a lot of free publicity because of that, and I think a lot of people are suddenly talking about that ad and that moment all of a sudden, and are giving Bloomberg a lot of free publicity. Now, he's obviously paid, $400 million for his publicity campaigns already, so Yeah. But, all publicity is good, and I think it's helpful. But I think also, going back to my points, I think that moment is going to connect with a lot of people. Because a lot of Americans, a lot of hardworking Americans go to job, come back from job, kind of look at it and say, like, wait, you expect to run the government, but you've never run a successful business. How's that going to work? And I think that actually is one of the big selling points. I think pretty much for my entire life, I've heard people say essentially that. It's, why don't we have businessman as president? Why don't we have someone who can run a business, run the country? And, with Trump, we did get that, although I don't think anyone who said that ever fully expected Trump to happen. But it did. But it is a really good selling point for a lot of Americans that, hey, the president should have some knowledge of how business works. Otherwise, it's not going to be good for us, not going to be good for the country.
People could be injured.
So, I think that is one moment that I think is connecting to people more than a lot of the political pundits realize. So, the next two moments with Bloomberg have to do with his confronting of Bernie Sanders. So, first off, this was a really interesting moment where Bloomberg makes the comment that you can't just replace, capitalism with communism and expect it to work. You can watch that moment, but the audience boos him, his fellow candidates boo him for saying that. And, Bernie Sanders gets up there and quite angrily, I think it's at this point he says this, but he quite angrily, says, I'm not a communist, I'm a democratic socialist. Now, I think Bernie has made a mistake, actually, with defining himself as a democratic socialist. Not that he defined himself as such, but that I think most Americans don't know the distinction between a democratic socialist and a communist. I certainly couldn't, off the top of my head, tell you what's different about those two political philosophies. So I think it's a brand issue. It's an issue with the brand of Bernie Sanders that people don't realize that, oh, wait, there might be a difference, and, oh, what is that difference? I don't get it. So, I think that was actually a telling moment, because I think most Americans really like capitalism. They're very patriotic. They like, the capitalistic system. They like that they can make money in the system in a way that, they couldn't under communism. And the fact that they don't see too much of distinction between Bernie's democratic socialism and, old school Russian communism, is probably one of the worst things about Bernie's campaign. And Bloomberg really heightened that by that moment, and it's really a moment that's not entirely to his credit. It also showed the reaction of everyone in the Democrats' debates showed that reaction, and a lot of Americans, a lot of moderates, are going to look at that and say, wait a second, that's not right. Bloomberg's making a good point about capitalism. We like capitalism. Why do we have to deal? We're not interested in getting a communistic or even a socialistic government. It's a good selling point. It's a good connection to a lot of people. Now, the second moment that Bloomberg went up against Bernie, this was a really, really good moment. I think it's more significant than a lot of people realize, is when he basically said, America is so great that even a socialist can now own 3 houses. Now, of course, Bernie was really upset by that. Bernie did not react well to that comment. We'll just say that. He pretty much started saying, well, you don't understand the realities of the situation. I have one house here in Washington, and Bloomberg actually gave a second really good response to that. It's an almost Trumpian response. I will say that, when he said, that's the problem at that point. And then Bernie said, well, I also, just kind of ignored it, kept going. I also have a house over here where I normally live. And then, like a lot of other people, I like to go to summer camp as a kid, so I have a summer camp. And it's, now that's, most viewers are looking at it going like, okay, that's pretty darn nonsensical. It would have made more sense if he just said, and I have a summer home, and so on. But the significance of this is that no one in the Democratic Party, whether they're media, whether they're politicians, has ever gone after Bernie for his wealth. It's like a verboten topic in the Democratic Party to do that. And this is the first time it's ever been done on the debate stage in front of media. Now, this is often covered by conservatives, and, you know, moderates will often mention that and discuss it, but it has not happened, and certainly hasn't happened on a debate stage, and has not been brought up by the media, which media really should be asking questions like that. It's one of the things that the media should be asking about. So it's a very important moment when a Democrat on the stage, or as close, well, you know, I honestly don't know. He just moved from Republican to Democrat, so I suppose you could call him Democrat. I'll just continue calling Bloomberg Democrat. Well, it's the first time, anyway, at a Democratic debate that someone has pointed out Bernie's wealth. And how, you know, just pointed it out, and just point out kind of the absurdity of a socialist, you know, gaining a massive amount of wealth in a capitalistic system. And it is a good talking point, and it's also, if Bernie gets the nominee, Trump is definitely going to go there with Bernie. And Bernie has just showed that he can't handle that sort of question very well. And I think a lot of people will connect with that. A lot of people look at that and say, wait a second, if you're a socialist, if you expect us all to be socialistic, communistic, however you expect us to be, how come you get 3 houses? How come you get so much wealth? How come all of this stuff? How come capitalism has been so good to you that you want to completely destroy it? Why should we have to live in a situation a certain way, and you won't have to live in that certain way? And these are good, valid questions to ask of Bernie and his policies. And the fact they haven't been asked up to now, I think, speaks very poorly of, you know, Democrats at the moment. And also, it's just not very. Yeah, it's just it's. These are questions that need to be asked. I'll just leave it at that. So the fourth moment that I think connected with people more than people realize is a moment that most everybody is saying this was a really, really bad moment for Bloomberg. And I looked at it and I saw something completely different. And I think a lot of people are going to see the same thing. And it's the famous, or pretty well-known moment where Elizabeth Warren started to ask Bloomberg about non-disclosure agreements within his company. And it's, you know, he started to explain kind of the realities of the situation to her. But, you know, of course she didn't want, she was going for moments. She was going essentially kind of the debate moments and didn't really want to hear his explanation of that, and really didn't give him much of a chance to explain and kept trying to talk over him. But basically, you know, she's talking about all the poor innocent women who are victims of these non-disclosure agreements, and, you know, why doesn't he reveal all of them to her? And he starts to explain, well, you need both consent. You know, we can't just reveal the non-disclosure agreement. And then she interrupts by saying, wait, are you giving people permission to reveal what's in the non-disclosure agreement? And of course he isn't. Now, anyone who's worked in any sort of business with a proprietary information knows that basically, even if has probably, if not actually signed a non-disclosure agreement, has probably signed something, you know, similar enough to basically an agreement not to disclose proprietary information even after you've left the job. That's fairly typical, and I think a lot of people who've worked different jobs have been in that position where it's like, oh, okay, I can't reveal this information. And they understand. I think non-disclosure agreements are understandable, more understandable to people than I think a lot of people realize. They're not necessarily about sexual misconduct. They can be, but most non-disclosure agreements are for proprietary information, for other, for just private information they protect the person signing it as much as the company that's signing it. It's basically a mutual protection thing, and it's an inherent. It's actually a pretty good thing to have, because that way, yeah, you can't disclose any of this information, but then the company likewise can't disclose it, and so it's a mutual benefit to both sides. And I think most people, if you've ever worked in a business that has had proprietary information, you recognize this. You recognize the inherent things about it. But regardless, the non-disclosure agreement was just kind of an excuse, we'll say, for Elizabeth Warren to launch an attack on Bloomberg. But what's interesting, what struck me first off, is that she had literally just done this with Bernie in the last debate, accusing Bernie of saying something sexist to her in a private conversation. It's the same sort of attack. In this case, she used non-disclosure agreements to attack Bloomberg, as opposed to saying, hey, Bloomberg said this one thing at this one time. Which, in fairness, it was information that was released to the press. We don't know who released that information. It could have been someone other than Elizabeth Warren, but it's probably someone involved in either her or Bernie's campaign that released that information. So, I want to be as fair as possible. Regardless, in the last debates, she used that against Bernie, and, a lot of people did not like the fact that she did that. Well, this is essentially the exact same thing, except using non-disclosure agreements. Basically, just coming out and saying that this has some sort of sinister, ulterior motive to all of these non-disclosure agreements. And like I said, it's not necessarily, she implied it's about sexual misconduct, and that all these women who signed it are victims, which is, I don't think, accurate to the situation. It is. Non-disclosure agreements are standard business practices, and like I said, they protect both parties, not just the corporation, but the person signing it. And you have this moment where where Bloomberg, I should say, too many B's in these debates, I find, is trying to explain this to Elizabeth Warren, and she's, talking over him, not letting him explain, and, just assigning sinister motives to it. And at one point you can see Bloomberg just kind of roll his eyes at it. Now, a lot of people have talked about that. Oh, that rolling his eyes is like, he's not taking it seriously, how women are objectified or anything like that. And no, it's not like that. I think anyone who's ever had to deal with an accusation that's absurd, whether it's in the workplace or not, will recognize that moment as, oh my gosh, are these people really that stupid? Do I really have to justify, basically, whatever it is I'm supposed to have done? Do I have to justify my actions to these people who won't listen, who don't understand the situation, or, are actually just trying to use the situation to their own advantage? It's that moment where you're like, do I have to deal with this? And anyone who's had to deal with, accusations that are just untrue or absurd, especially in like workplace environments and stuff like that, recognize that moment as, oh, for crying out loud. And I think the fact that he rolled his eyes, the fact that he did that, is going to be relatable to anyone who's had to deal with false allegations at any place. And, regardless. Now, I'm not going to speak for Bloomberg. I honestly don't know if he has any skeletons in his closet, if any of these non-disclosure agreements have the sinister tone and feel that have been given to them by Warren. But I will say this: most people are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Most Americans do firmly believe in innocent until proven guilty. He will be given the benefit of the doubt, especially since there's no real accusation against him, just an innuendo. And will relate to that moment where he's like, oh, do I have to answer this? Do I have to deal with this sort of thing? Why? Why do I have to deal with these sort of accusations? I've done nothing wrong. And I think people will relate to that more than they realize. And I think, at least for a lot of Democrats are now suddenly going to be turning and giving more support to Bloomberg because of these 4 things that I issued and outlined. And I think it would be a good idea if people started to take him a bit more seriously because of that. If people realize, wait, this guy, you know, he actually now has a bit more of a chance than we have given him credit for. So anyway, that's my 2 cents for however long this video has gone on about the debates. Let me know what you think. Am I completely and totally wrong about my interpretation of these events? Or are you going to say, wait, he might have a good point? I prefer the second, but yeah, you know what? You think what you want to think. Anyway, like and subscribe. I will see you in the next video. Bye.